Folks, welcome to the program. This is hour number 2. My name is Paul. You have found the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. We appreciate you being with us. We just came off a fantastic interview with Senator Gary Stubblefield, where we got his impression of the session. And now we got back-to-back fantastic interviews because joining us now, welcome back to the program, Senator Scott Flippo joins us on the phone. Scott, welcome, sir.
Paul, how are you?
I'm doing.
Happy to be with y'all.
I'm really glad that you could as well, and I know you've had a busy session, and this is our impression of the session. We're trying to talk to as many of you guys as we can, and so just feel free. Tell us what your impression was.
Well, let me start with. I was listening to your program. I missed your earlier segment with Senator Stubblefield, and I wish I would have caught that. But I was listening yesterday, and one of the things the questions you asked was, who was happiest now that the Arkansas legislature is out of session? And I think you said the governor was. I would disagree.
You disagree?
I think the state of Arkansas at large is happy to see us out of session, regardless of which side of the political spectrum you fall on. I think universally everybody's happy to see us out. And probably nobody any happier than I am.
That's a good perspective to have. It does seem like, certainly gets more contentious when all of you guys get down there and try to, decide things.
Especially as we get towards the end of session.
Yeah, somebody said last night, I was at a meeting last night, and they said, if you want to get something contentious through, you either do it right at the very beginning or you do it right at the very end. You agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. And especially at the end, because there's this massive uptick in the number of bills that you'll find on the calendar, and so everybody's trying to get things, and towards the end of the last month of session, and especially as we close in on the last week, we'll generally convene in session for hours longer than what we do in the middle or the beginning of session, and people are just going down there and getting these bills through, and it gets to a time when everybody's trying to get home, and they'll just try to roll the vote on something or give you a half explanation. And so you have to be careful, and you have to do your due diligence. And, it kind of goes back to where you and I have talked about, and I attempted to do it this year, which was to get a rules change to limit the number of the number of bills that a legislator could run. Couldn't get the support this year, but we'll continue trying. I think inherently it is a good idea.
I do too.
And I think that when I go off and visit with people in my district and across the state, and I ask them a simple question: do you want to see more or fewer laws coming out of Little Rock? The answer is an unequivocal fewer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's funny, Scott. I was at this Tea Party meeting last night in my area, and this came up. That this is a great idea, that in other states do this. I didn't realize this, but other states limit the amount of laws
Correct.
that a legislator can pass.
I believe, and I researched this last year, and I want to say, and it's been a while, Paul, so don't hold my feet to the fire, but I believe there's about 16 states that have some form of limitations on the number of bills that they can run. And, of course, these vary. So, it's not across the board. They're not all the same, but, there is a precedent for it. And that's something that I think as a conservative, that, naturally I'm always worried about government overreach and intruding into my life. And so, as you're passing a large number of bills, I think you increase the possibility of that happening. And so, again, it just makes good sense to me for us to be visiting about that as a legislative body in the Senate and in the House, and how we get a hold of ourselves. And I'm not saying that, a lot of these bills aren't horrible bills. They might not be great bills. I think a lot of times we get some kind of mediocre. And, I think there's more pressing issues. And I think there's a lot of votes that we make that, you could make a good argument that warrant more discussion.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you this. How many times did you hear the phrase, this bill is not going to do much. It's just for technical corrections. How many times did you hear that?
Oh, I couldn't even begin to quantify or count how many times I've heard that. This is a little old bill that ain't going to do much of anything. And you know what? Sometimes they're right, And sometimes you look, down the road, and usually what you don't know at the time is you have to wait until you wait and you pass that bill, and you find out down the road, oh well, this actually isn't just a little old bill that's not going to do much of anything. And of course, the heavy lifting is always done in committee. The problem is that we don't all serve on the same committee. So I don't serve on the Senate Education Committee, and so we had a school choice bill. Or an educational savings bill that was, that we voted on, and it passed through the Senate, and it died in the House, and the House version died in the House and didn't make it to the Senate. And so I'm spending a lot of my time, trying to get fluent with this and ask the sponsors questions, but I'm not in that committee to listen to all the arguments for and against. And I'm thinking to myself, this would be something that we should get to, the entire Senate, and we could go into the chamber and talk about this for a day, because it's a big issue, and it's going to, it's got the potential to impact a lot of people. And, of course, if you're running all these bills, you don't have the time to do that. And what I would like to see is for us to tap the brakes and let's get the pros and cons, and let's get varying arguments and sides on some of these issues, because I think we shortchange our constituency when we don't.
I agree. That people, you're down there trying to interpret data and, make a right decision for the folks back home. Let me ask you this. So, you had the idea to try to limit the amount of bills we could pass. That would be a great check on government. It would make people really thoughtful about what they want to support. You're not going to have some lobbyist group that just tries to find a puppet and get some legislator run a bill for them that they don't really even care about. And they're like, yeah, sure, I'll run it. That won't happen as much. But when you came up with this idea, you say you didn't have support for it. What were some of the responses you got for why they wouldn't support it?
Because, a leading response is that they would deprive my constituents of their right to contact me to run a bill. And that's true. But how many times are your constituents, and it happens. Let me, be clear. Yes, I get, several requests from my constituents, that have a problem or see something, and I'll touch on one of those here in a little bit, that would like me to, run a piece of legislation. But the majority of it comes from, around the Capitol and people in Little Rock. And be it, a state agency or a lobbyist or whatnot, that's where the majority of these bills are coming from. And again, I'm not saying that these are all bad bills, but I think that you should have to sit down and really put some thought into and pick and choose exactly what it is you want to carry. I believe that I was the lead sponsor on maybe 8 bills this session. And, I've never wanted to hang my hat on, and looking at my benchmark is basing it on how many bills can I get passed, how many new laws can I get passed. I take pride in not trying to pass a whole bunch of new laws. Yeah.
There are others that they sponsored 20, 30, 40. There's some, the numbers can get kind of ridiculous.
And listen, there's times where I get that. And one of the things that I never thought I'd be talking about as a senator when I ran for the Senate in 2014 was about marijuana and medical marijuana. And, that was something that was voted on, and the voters in Arkansas, passed that measure. And there's so much that has to be done when you're looking to set up something like that. And it really requires, well over 50 bills, maybe closer to 100. And so, that there are times when I can look at it and see, it's not just you can include every single thing into one bill.
Yeah.
It takes a multitude. And so, there are going to be exceptions to something. But let's not let those rare cases, prevent us from taking what I think is a very common sense approach. And, this session was a difficult session. I think there was some good and there was some bad that came out of it. Taxes were raised this year several times over.
How could that happen, Scott? The Republican Party platform is so it really just comes down to revenue. Why? Why do they need the money? Why do they need more money from us?
Because government loves to spend money. And what I think we all look at is there's always going to be more needs than there is money. at a certain point, should we all just send our wallets and our checkbook to Little Rock and say, you just take what you think is fair and send it back when you're finished? Because there's always going to be a compelling reason. And believe me, I mean, I visit with people. I go to a lot of different agencies and move around to my district and across this state, and there are needs out there. What I think we have to address is, what of those needs need to be getting handled at the local level and what need to be handled at the state level. If you want less centralized government, then you've got to have, a more of a focus on your local government, and you got to do more at the local level. And that involves an active society, an active constituency. And if that is not there, what you will see is that centralized government begin to, step in and take over. And, being a conservative is difficult, Paul. There's so many votes that I've made and we could take the private option and now Arkansas Works, for example, that when I cast a vote against the appropriations for that, what I know is that if I got my way, a lot of folks are, a lot of able-bodied working-age adults that are getting subsidized insurance would no longer have it. Some of those people I know personally. They're good, hard-working people, and I personally wouldn't have a problem dipping into my own pocket and wanting to help them pay for their insurance. They're not, they're not gaming the system. They're not lazy or worthless or degenerates. They're good people, I think, by anybody's measures. But what I know is that, and I believe, is that this is an unsustainable program, and it's starting to, and we're starting to see it as we're starting to have to start picking up our share of the expense on it, is that it's putting strains on other parts of the state's budget.
Is that why there are so many taxes?
The rubber meets the road there.
I mean, is that really why? I mean, we got to pay for this Medicaid expansion this year. Is that why there was this quest to try to get Republicans to get, vote for more revenue?
I think that's a large part of it. I'm not going to say that's the only part, but absolutely, that's that's, as everybody knows. I mean, Medicaid's a fairly large part of our state's budget and our state's spending, and so especially the expansion program. Now, those first 3 years were picked up by the federal government, and of course, probably all of your listeners are paying federal taxes. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily free money. But we don't call them taxes. They're a fee. Or it's revenue neutral. And sometimes that's most likely the case. And other times I look at it and think, there's no way in the world this is revenue neutral. There's no way. And it's just kind of something where at some point, especially as a conservative, when money's tight or your budget forecasts are below expectations, like they currently are.
Yeah.
Budget report just came out this week, and if that means that we've got to go back and look at spending and look at programs, well, yeah, those decisions are always difficult. They're never easy, but that's kind of what conservatism is to me. Is it's not about the easy way; it's about the right way. And sometimes that I know when I make a vote that at some point, if I got my way, that there would be some pain that goes along with it.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't make me feel good, but I think sometimes it's necessary.
Yeah. The governor in an article today, the governor's saying, we're behind projections, $50 million for March. It's now a total of $65 million on the year, but it's too soon to talk cuts. And I just started thinking, just in general, what you're talking about, Scott, is great. It's conservative, but nobody really wants to cut. The closest you can get them to cut is to kind of make, say you're cutting, but you're not really, you kind of just play a little shell game and you try. Just with the taxes, it's like we didn't really have any tax cuts, regardless of what they said, because they raised so many taxes other places.
You bet. And, everybody, I think most people, they're all about trimming the waste in government spending, be it at the local level, the state level, and certainly the federal level. And, of course, I actually had somebody from the Capitol bumping on the other line there.
Uh-oh.
But, yeah, a lot of everybody agrees that we want to cut spending. We want to cut the waste. Well, what is the waste? It's fairly subjective. It's, if it doesn't directly impact you or the people you care about, then a lot of times you might be indifferent and say, well, that's fine, we can cut there. But if it impacts you and it knocks on your front door, then most likely you don't want that. And that even includes conservatives, and I appreciate that. But, again, I think that a lot of times in politics, we go around and we talk about things, and we don't talk about and level with people about if this comes and we get this, that in at least the short term, it's going to get worse before it gets better. It's going to get more difficult before it gets better.
Yeah.
And whoever wants to, make a decision that's going to make their life more difficult.
Yeah.
Nobody.
Yeah, that's true. And
sometimes that is absolutely necessary.
I agree, and I think we're at that point now. We do have to go, Senator Scott Flippo. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you giving us your impression of the session, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
Paul, happy to visit with you anytime. I appreciate what you do. Keep it up.
Appreciate you and your conservative voting record, sir. Yes, sir. Folks, we got to go to break. The phone number, if you want to call me or text me, 870-275-9799. Coming up at the bottom of the hour.